He walked into court in handcuffs. Another homeless man, another case, another forgotten soul. But when he quietly said his name, Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines, something happened. The judge froze. The room changed, and what unfolded next stunned everyone. This is the true story of a decorated war hero lost in America's shadows, until one moment in court brought everything back to light. He had no idea the judge knew him, or that she had been waiting 20 years to say thank you, stay until the end, because what began as a trespassing charge became a national moment of recognition, redemption, and justice. He didn't look like a hero. The old man shuffled into the courtroom with chains around his wrists and a coat that swallowed his frame. His shoes didn't match. His hair was more salt than pepper, and his face carried the weary lines of two. Many winters survived on park benches. No one paid him much attention. Not the bailiff, not the prosecutor, not even the people waiting for their own cases to be called. "State your name," the clerk asked. He raised his head slowly and spoke with a voice raspy from silence. "Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines." A few glanced up. Most didn't. But on the bench, Judge Olivia Parker blinked. She glanced down at the file in front of her, thumbing through the charges. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest. Typical for a man with no place to go. Typical for a winter night, a locked cafe, and a body desperate for warmth. Yet when her eyes fell on his name again, something caught in her chest. Elias J. Carter. She felt her hands tremble. That name wasn't just a name. Years ago, in a letter from her brother Jack, a Marine killed in action in Iraq, there had been a story about a man who ran through gunfire to carry the wounded, a man who saved lives when all seemed lost, a man who vanished afterward, like a ghost. That man's name had been Elias Carter. Now he sat slouched before her in second-hand clothes, shoulders hunched from cold and shame. Once decorated in dress blues, now silent and forgotten. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly overhead. The prosecutor began to speak, indifferent, rehearsed. "The defendant has repeatedly loitered behind Jefferson Street Cafe despite multiple warnings." But Judge Parker wasn't listening anymore. She was staring, not at the man accused, but at the man remembered. And with every second that passed, the room around her began to feel heavier. Because sometimes, before justice can be served, history must be seen. And sometimes, a courtroom doesn't hold a criminal. It holds a story no one expected to find again. Not like this, not in cuffs. Judge Olivia Parker stared down at the name again, her mind racing past the present and back to dusty memories she thought had long faded. Elias J. Carter. She had heard that name once before, not in a courtroom, not in a police report, but in a handwritten letter, smudged with sand and hope, from her younger brother Jack. Jack Parker, United States Marine, killed in action in Fallujah, Iraq. That name had appeared in the paragraph she had read 1,000 times. Back then, she was just a law student. Jack had been her hero. He wrote about a man in his unit, a staff sergeant who had run into enemy fire, dragged wounded Marines out of the line of death, and then disappeared, quietly, humbly. "Carter," Jack had written, "is the kind of Marine you want beside you when everything goes to hell." And now here he was, not in uniform, but in a coat meant for someone else, sitting on a courtroom bench like he'd been mistaken for a nuisance rather than remembered as a savior. Olivia reached beneath her robe, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against a folded photo she always kept tucked in her briefcase. Jack smiling in his dress blues. She had never forgotten the funeral, the folded flag, the Marines who came up to her afterward. One of them had said, "Your brother saved lives, but he only had the chance to because someone saved him first." She had spent years wondering who that someone was, and now, unbelievably, she was looking right at him. The courtroom's fluorescent lights felt too bright, too sterile to hold a moment this sacred. She inhaled deeply, tried to slow the beating. In her chest, this man before her wasn't just a defendant, he was a memory, a lifeline, A ghost come back to life, but protocol demanded she remain impartial, composed. She picked up her gavel again with a hand that no longer felt steady. Because how do you weigh justice when the man before you once carried it through fire? And how do you remain a judge when the person on trial is the reason your brother lived long enough to be remembered? It happened just as the judge was about to speak. The courtroom doors swung open. A man in a sharply tailored navy suit strode down the aisle, his polished shoes tapping against the tile floor. His presence shifted the room's atmosphere, drawing eyes and whispers. Without hesitation, he walked to the defense table and placed his briefcase beside Elias Carter. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Alexander Ross, I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter." Elias turned, startled. He had no idea who this man was. Judge Parker adjusted her glasses. "This court was not informed of any change in representation," she said carefully. "Mr. Carter, did you retain this attorney?" Elias shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, I don't even know his name." Ross leaned slightly toward Elias. "You won't need to," he whispered. "My firm is taking your case pro bono." Judge Parker raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "It's a last-minute development," Ross answered, "but one we believe is necessary." There was a long pause. Then, with a measured nod, she said, "This court will recess for 15 minutes. As the room emptied, Elias leaned toward Ross. "I can't pay for this. I don't have anything." Ross gave a small smile. "You won't have to. Williams, Ross, and Parker is handling it." Elias's brow furrowed. "Parker?" Ross nodded. "Exactly like the judge." Inside her chambers, Judge Olivia Parker removed her glasses and stared at the photograph on her desk. Jack standing proudly in his uniform, his arm around her shoulders. The memory washed over her like a tide. The name, Carter. The battle in Fallujah. Jack's final letter. She pressed her fingers to her lips. "It can't be the same man," she whispered. But deep down, she already knew. The man now sitting on trial wasn't just any homeless veteran. He was the reason she had those last words from her brother. And fate had just brought him back through her courtroom door. The courtroom buzzed faintly as Judge Parker returned to the bench. But something in her had changed. Behind the stoic mask, a storm was gathering. She looked over at Elias Carter and asked a question rarely heard in courtrooms. "Mr. Carter, were you in Fallujah in April of 2004? Elias straightened slightly, the name pulling something old and heavy to the surface. "Yes, ma'am, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. We were escorting a convoy when we got ambushed." "And did you rescue a Lieutenant Jack Parker?" The room fell silent. Elias's weathered face tightened with memory. "Yes, he'd taken a hit trying to pull another Marine out. I got to him, dragged him behind cover. He told me to leave him. Kept yelling to help the others instead." Olivia's voice shook slightly. "And what happened next?" "We got him on the Bird. He made it to Germany, I heard. But a few weeks later, IED got his convoy." A pause, hung in the air. Then from the gallery, a voice broke through. "That's him." A silver-haired Marine stood, pointing directly at Elias. "Staff Sergeant Carter. He saved 6 of us that day. Took 2 rounds and didn't stop." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The prosecutor stood to object, but Judge Parker raised a hand. "This court finds his military record deeply relevant." She recessed the court for 10 minutes and walked out slowly, her back straight but her hands trembling. In her chambers, she picked up the phone with shaking fingers. "Colonel Matthews, it's Olivia Parker. I need a favor. Urgent." 10 minutes later, she returned. 3 Marines walked behind her. A colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Elias stood instinctively, posture rigid. Something stirred in him, something long buried. It was respect. Recognition. Judge Parker looked him in the eyes for the first time. "This man," she said softly, "is not who you think. He is not just a name on a docket. He's a piece of our country's history." And as the polished wooden case was opened and the Navy Cross revealed, silence flooded the room. The courtroom didn't just see a defendant anymore. They saw a soldier, a survivor. A hero. The silence didn't last long. As the Navy Cross was lifted from the box, polished and glowing under the lights, the courtroom stirred again. Then, a single voice called out, clear and commanding. "Attention on deck!" The silver-haired Marine, in the gallery, stood to full height. Slowly, others followed. Veterans in worn jackets, court officers, even civilians, all stood. Some saluted. Others simply placed hands over their hearts. Elias Carter, still in second-hand clothes and handcuffs, looked around in disbelief. His back straightened. For the first time in years, his chin rose. Not from pride, but from memory, muscle memory. Honor long buried, but not dead. Judge Parker stepped from behind the bench. "This court recognizes extraordinary service and sacrifice," she said, her voice no longer judicial but deeply human. "We acknowledge that Elias Carter was not trespassing to cause harm. He was trying to survive, and his record shows that he's already given more than most ever will." She turned to the prosecutor. "Do you still wish to pursue these charges?" The young man looked at Elias, then at the room, now completely on its feet. He shook his head slowly. "No, Your Honor." "Then let the record show," she declared, "that all charges are dismissed, with prejudice." The gavel came down, and just like that, Elias Carter was free. But the recognition didn't stop there. The Master Sergeant stepped forward with a tablet. "Sir, your VA record has been corrected. You've been granted a 100% disability rating. Retroactive. You are now entitled to full medical care, housing assistance, and back pay." Elias blinked. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," the sergeant smiled, "you're coming home, Sergeant." Then from the back of the courtroom, another figure emerged. "Jimmy, the cook from the cafe. My dad told me," he said, voice thick with emotion. "If I ever met a man named Elias Carter, I owed him everything." Jimmy extended a hand. "I didn't know it was you. Not until today." Elias shook his hand, the old strength returning to his grip. Across the courtroom, Olivia Parker watched with tears in her eyes. Not as a judge, but as a sister. A sister who finally had a chance to say thank you to the man who once gave her family 2 more weeks with someone they loved. 2 weeks later, Elias Carter stood before a mirror in a quiet, furnished apartment that still didn't feel like his. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling softly across a simple frame on the wall. His Navy Cross, flanked by the medals. Ross had recovered, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and his service ribbons. He adjusted his collar in the mirror. The clothes were new, but he still moved like a man who wasn't used to softness. Decades of survival don't disappear overnight. A knock at the door. When he opened it, Olivia Parker stood outside. Not in robes, just herself, carrying a small wooden box. "May I come in, Sergeant Carter?" she asked. "Just Elias," he said with a quiet smile. "Then just Olivia," she replied. They sat together in the modest living room, the weight of memory and gratitude hanging between them. "I brought something," Olivia said, opening the box. Inside, a bundle of letters, yellowed, worn, carefully tied with string. "They're Jack's from Iraq. He wrote us every week. This one," she handed him a letter, "mentions you. It's dated the day after you saved him." Elias's hands shook as he unfolded it. He read aloud slowly. "Mom, Dad, don't worry about the news. I'm okay. We got hit hard yesterday, but Staff Sergeant Carter got me out. He ran through enemy fire like it didn't exist. I told him to leave me, but he refused. Said no Marine gets left behind." His voice caught. "He said that often," Olivia whispered. "Even in the last letter we got, he wanted to live like you. He admired you." Elias stared down at the page, lost in thought. "I always wondered," he murmured, "if saving him just delayed the inevitable. If maybe it didn't matter." Olivia placed a hand gently on his. "It mattered. To Jack, to me, to everyone you carried, then and now." Outside, snow had begun to fall. Light, quiet, steady. "For years I thought no one remembered," Elias said. "Like it all faded." "But it didn't," Olivia replied. He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Someone remembered my name." And in that moment, a lifetime of weight began to lift. Not just for Elias Carter, but for every forgotten soul who gave everything and waited quietly for the world to remember. For years, Elias Carter slept in silence, on sidewalks, in alleys, beneath a world that had forgotten his name. But on one cold day in court, that name echoed. Not because he demanded it, not because he asked, but because someone remembered. This story is not just about one man. It's about every veteran who came home with invisible wounds. It's about dignity, and how easy it is to lose, and how powerful it is to give back. So if this story moved you, share it. Let it remind the world that heroism doesn't vanish with age or poverty or time, and that sometimes the most powerful justice is simply being seen. To every Elias Carter out there, we remember you and we salute you.